Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and in this video, I'm going to be breaking down some of my biggest takeaways, 10 of them from Week 11 fantasy football, dating back to the Thursday night game played between the Packers and the Titans. We just finished up Sunday night between the Chargers and the Chiefs. That was a wild one, obviously. We've got some more drama late in that contest. We'll talk through all that stuff and more in today's episode, but let's dive right on in to our first takeaway here from Week 11. All right, as always, you guys, if you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. We're trying to grow around here and, of course, help out as many fantasy players as we can this season. So I'm going to dive back to Thursday night football between the Titans and the Green Bay Packers to kick off today's episode, talking some Christian Watson. Now, I was a bit hesitant to go here last week, but my takeaway from this game is that Christian Watson, if he can sustain health here and, be available on the field for this team, he will be the most valuable fantasy wide receiver for this Packers offense. Last week, I was still kind of somewhat attached to the idea that Allen Lazard would continue to be the most dependable threat for this team in the passing game, which, after all, is not a high-octane passing offense. This is a very run-centric team right now, and you really need to capitalize on the big play and the red zone area of the field, scoring touchdowns to produce points here. But Christian Watson is perfectly built for those two things. So Allen Lazard is not necessarily the same level of a deep threat that Watson is here, and opening up the idea and just potential for a 75-yard walk-in touchdown, which Watson has because of his flashy speed here, gives you a lot more fantasy upside. Now, of course, he does have the 5 touchdowns in 1 point in a 4-day span from Sunday to Thursday night football. That's not sustainable, but what you can get here is potentially a player that stretches the field and, obviously makes the defense respect him vertically with a massive frame, wingspan, height advantage over players. You saw the Moss touchdown he had in the back corner of the end zone on the free play from Rodgers. That stuff can be expected in the future here. And this is a potentially league-winning flex level player or wide receiver 3 level producer that has a lot of upside for teams here. So again, the takeaway is that I do believe that going forward, if there is a receiver to own in this Packers offense, for me, it looks like Christian Watson is that guy right now. Treylon Burks here, diving into our second takeaway from Thursday night. There's a lot of interesting stuff that went on this week, but I particularly wanted to focus in on this game, which I thought had a lot of interesting dynamics. First and foremost, Treylon Burks could be on the cusp of a breakout situation for this Titans offense. I'm not going to go ahead and say right now definitively that this was Treylon Burks' breakout game, because I do think there was a pretty big piece, a 51-yard chunk of context behind his production at the end of the day that's worth noting. But what I did love to see was an increased level of usage of him in this offense in what was a closer game that I feel the score really reflects at the end of the day. This was a kind of scrappy game between the two teams. The Titans ultimately did control the game through 4 quarters, but Treylon was still involved in the passing game. They still made an emphasis to get him the football despite this lead, and the 2 deep shots that he was able to successfully convert on, I think, are impressive indicators of what to expect going forward. So, of course, heading into the situation in the pre-draft process, the one tie we had was the deep play action passing game with crossers and vertical pressing routes that A.J. Brown relatively frequently ran last year and throughout his career with Tennessee throughout those first 4 years. So, or rather the first 3 years, this now being year 4 for Brown in Philadelphia. So Burks was that guy that we expected to kind of consume that role. He physically charts the best into that usage for this team, and we started to see that a little bit here in Week 11. Going forward, with the success they had on those 2 deep shots, it is hopefully a positive sign that could be a bit more frequent going forward here. That piece of context, that 51-yard piece of context I talked about, though, was with 2 minutes and 4 seconds. They kind of caught Jair Alexander sleeping on a play-action pass route right before the 2-minute warning. The game was all but signed, sealed, and delivered here, and they basically just took a shot downfield to officially ice things. Burks was able to convert on that and end up dragging Jair for about 5 to 7 more yards after that catch. So something to note there, he did have that vertical play, though, early in the game. So impressive stuff from Burks here in Week 11, and is at least worth a roster stash in the weeks moving forward. Allen Robinson here, I was very pessimistic of him heading into this game against the New Orleans Saints. My takeaway, though, is that he can be a touchdown-dependent wide receiver 3 in this Rams offense. Now, the ceiling isn't super high, nor is the floor, but what you do have here is the opportunity for increased volume. Now, that didn't really show its face in this game, but as now the alpha alpha wide receiver. I put that in quotation marks because it's a very light alpha role here. And as expected, he wasn't the guy that took the significant jump in this game, but there is still that possibility that in, the vacuum of a 1-week window, that does become the circumstance. Robinson was able to deliver a touchdown. It was a goal line slant route that he ran there, had 4 receptions on 5 targets for 47 yards and that score. So if you're going to see, a guy in Cooper Kupp who had 11.2 targets per game out the next 6 to 8 weeks, potentially putting his fantasy season out the window here for the majority, or not the majority, the remainder of the 2022 season, Robinson becomes that next man up. Now, it was Tyler Higbee with 8 targets that we kind of thought maybe underneath would see some more work. Matthew Stafford's role in this offense is also kind of a big deal as he's in concussion protocol yet again, and that ended up seeing Bryce Perkins put into the game, which is not ideal, of course, for anyone in this Rams offense. So a lot of moving pieces here, but at the end of the day, I do think that if you're going to see those goal line fades that he's been running a lot of, as well as some more, crossing action here as a potential, next man, pegged up the pecking order here, you could see some more touchdown production, which does make him into a flex level player here, which frankly he has not been throughout the majority of this season. David Montgomery here, I have him as a player who I now believe and trust in as a sustainable RB2 for the rest of this season. His schedule is very favorable. This matchup against Atlanta, he took 20 touches for 124 yards. Of course, the key factor here is that Khalil Herbert is now a player on the injured reserve. So this being his first game missed, you've now got at least 3 more games before Herbert's even eligible to return. I'm not necessarily sure of the time frame for that right now, but at the very least, you've got a month-long window where David Montgomery is an incredibly startable player with a good schedule and the opportunity to take advantage of this Bears offensive structure and the run-heavy approach they employ. Of course, Justin Fields' health is a major concern for this team. He was kind of carted off, which he probably didn't need to be. It was a non-throwing shoulder injury that could impact his ability to run the football and play physical the next couple of weeks, or his availability for week 12. All that stuff, stay posted for that later. We don't have access to information at the time of this video, which is again hot off of the Chargers and the Chiefs playing on Sunday Night Football. But moral of the story, bottom line, I'm very impressed with David Montgomery. It wasn't always pretty on the ground. There was a lot of back and forth lateral running that I didn't like, but he was able to spurt free, and his scrimmage yardage as a result of some efficient pass catching was able to be very nice here. So the usage is kind of what you should hang your hat on here, is that spike in opportunities on a per week basis. Garrett Wilson. There was some discussion, this is our 5th takeaway of the week. There's some discussion heading into the Week 10 bye that Garrett Wilson was going to become a dependable weekly wide receiver 3 or flex level player. And I was pessimistic to take this approach. I actually had him as a sell high after his big game against the Pats in Week 8. And then you had the Week 9 contest. And now you walk in here to Week 11 against the Pats the second time around, and you have an even more brutal showing from Zach Wilson. And my takeaway here, I apologize, I kind of beat around the bush, is that I still think he belongs, for the most part, on fantasy owners' benches. He is a great talent in a miserable situation right now. The reason I say that is there's been signs throughout this season that the team is looking to play in spite of Zach Wilson, and today that got kind of extended to another level. You've got the fact that he's deflecting blame. He is not taking accountability for having 9 completions in 4 quarters, scoring 3 punts, losing a football game on a punt return touchdown, regardless if you're a Jets or Patriots fan or, want to point out the blocks in the back or not. None of that matters for Garrett Wilson here. The thing that you have to consider is the fact that this is a player at a dependent position who needs a passer to distribute accurate passes. This is one of the issues we see with guys like DJ Moore. This is a problem for guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts. He doesn't have competent quarterback play right now. He can go out there because he is such a dog and get you 100 yards in a given matchup. But in games like this where Zach plays an above average defense and has an absolute meltdown, again, they punted the ball more times than Zach completed passes today, you're going to see just brutally ugly numbers like this. So for me, that level of erratic inconsistency has no place in my starting lineup, especially with the relative limitations to his ceiling. I love Garrett Wilson. I've said this more, but many times throughout the season to kind of qualify my redraft criticism of him. I had him as my dynasty wide receiver 1 in the 2022 class, ahead of guys like Drake London and Treylon Burks and other names, Chris Olave, who's balling out right now. I think he is that special and talented of a route runner and athlete. But this year, this situation needs to be extended a bit more because right now the infrastructure is just not in place. Amari Cooper, this is a guy who is now a top 10 fantasy scoring wide receiver on the season, having the best statistical season of his career. And my takeaway here is he's absolutely the potential caliber of a player to be a league-winning wide receiver down the stretch of this season. You are having these numbers on display for Amari Cooper, a guy who's been pretty inconsistent in road games this season. This week, I'll kind of take exception to the fact they played in a dome, which I also think Amari tends to play a bit better in. But with Jacoby Brissett as your quarterback, having a transition into a new offense in Cleveland, away from Dallas, you are seeing Amari Cooper on full display here. An elite route runner, a fantastic, phenomenal footwork magician here. This guy goes out on the field and balls out when they need him to. In games where Cleveland has to score points, he's, just doing spectacular things with his production. And the infusion of Deshaun Watson into this offense in Week 13, I think opens the door for major rises in the rate of production of ceiling performances from Amari Cooper, if that makes sense. So basically, I think that as Deshaun gets into this offense here, if things play out in a positive fashion where there's not major regression and major rust that he has to knock off, he could come out here and elevate Cooper's weekly floor as well as raise the bar in terms of the percentage of times he hits that fantasy ceiling, which could be a big deal for fantasy owners. So maybe there's a rough game in Week 13, the first game back. Maybe even Week 14 is a bit of a struggle. The playoffs, though, Weeks 15, 16, 17, that is when I think that Amari Cooper has the opportunity to make this strides even longer here and the production even greater when fantasy owners need him the most. He's coming off of a great performance against Buffalo, a tough defense. Personnel-wise, they're a bit undermanned in the back end, but still structurally, functionally, schematically, a very good defensive unit to go up against. Baker Mayfield here, talking some more smack about the Carolina Panthers. This is going to seem rather obvious to many, but there is one critical difference in this take than I've had in weeks past. The reason that I included it once again in this list here, there are no startable fantasy football players in this Carolina Panthers offense when Baker Mayfield is the starting quarterback. You cannot, in good faith, start Baker Mayfield and expect good things to happen, good things to come here for your rosters. The one difference, again, in this situation this week that we've seen now as opposed to have not seen in previous weeks is the presence of D'Onta Foreman, a new fantasy. I would almost go as far pre this week to call him a star based off the things he's done in 3 of the last 4 games heading into Week 11 here. The things that just melted down for Baker in this offense in this contest. So pre this game where Baker was a starter because of a high ankle sprain to PJ Walker, you had a situation where Christian McCaffrey was slowly just, kind of sputtering his way along this season, double-digit performances. In spite of Baker Mayfield, D'Onta Foreman is not Christian McCaffrey. He doesn't have the pass-catching repertoire to get those points on the table without relative competence at quarterback. Is PJ Walker elite? No, but he does a heck of a lot better job of playmaking and situational creation of yardage for this team. Baker looks terrible. He is easily one of the worst first overall draft picks that I've watched in my time seriously analyzing the game here. This is a guy who is just continually, whether it's a situational regression from Cleveland or not, has really lowered the bar for what this offense can be. So PJ Walker's return can't come soon enough here. 3 points from this offense is pathetic. And again, we know DJ Moore and Terrace Marshall and Tommy Tremble and other supporting cast members of this offense, Laviska Shenault, you're not starting them. I think that list now includes D'Onta Foreman, especially in these more difficult opponents here on the other side of the field from Baker Mayfield. Tony Pollard here. This dude deserves weekly lineup consideration every single game moving forward. If he hasn't carved out a role consistently on a week-to-week basis in this offense, I don't know how he can, who is going to take work away from Ezekiel Elliott. Tony Pollard is doing just spectacular things in this offense right now. He had 21 for 189 yards and 2 touchdowns. He is insanely explosive. The things he brings, the juice he provides to this offense are game-breaking speed and next-level stuff. He untaps a new dimension of this Cowboys offense that they really hadn't taken full advantage of until Zeke's injury, and I think that this might be, the best thing for this team. Zeke is still able to kind of go in there, be the battering ram for this team, and I think if they use an approach similar to the way that the Packers use Aaron Jones, now the Cowboys offense is far better than Green Bay's right now, but if you go out here and use Zeke in that A.J. Dillon role, you're between the tackles, slam it in on the goal line type player, and Tony Pollard is your do-it-all, everything else, explosive pass-catching back that you use as a change of pace, efficient rusher, like the more Aaron Jones type style of things here, not a true workhorse, but a guy who can be very, very valuable in the touches he gets. This offense could be dynamite here. You've got an alpha receiver. You've got a nice supporting cast. Maybe you bring in OBJ here in a couple of weeks. A lot of things are going right here. But again, the takeaway is that for fantasy owners with Tony Pollard on the roster, you're feeling great right now because this guy is going out there and doing fantastic things. This production, from a coaching standpoint, should continue going forward. And again, if it doesn't, they're fools in Dallas. Despite how healthy Zeke is or isn't, he can't do this. He can't bring this to the table. So they need to keep getting him the rock. And I'm considering Tony Pollard a RB2, to be honest, here going forward, just because of the upside he has on a week-to-week basis. I would definitely say that Zeke, despite his 2 touchdowns today, it was a blowout. The game script was beautiful for these players, so painted kind of a easier road to victory for fantasy managers having these guys on their rosters. But Tony Pollard, I would say at this point, has more utility to managers than Ezekiel Elliott does. Jonathan Taylor here, getting into our last 2 breakdowns of today's episode. First of all, JT absolutely looks like a running back one, a top 12 player for the rest of this season. In a tough matchup against Philadelphia in terms of a expected game script perspective on the ground, I know Philadelphia has been below the bar in terms of stopping opposing running backs, but you expected that this Colts team would probably get wiped by this Philadelphia team coming off of their first loss of the season. There should have been some positive progression here from what we saw from the Eagles in Week 10, but they came out and struggled. Now, they did get the 1-point win at the end of the day, but early and throughout this contest, the Colts fought. And yes, Jonathan Taylor started hot and kind of finished a bit cold. The offense as a whole kind of sputtered out here, but this team seems to be playing a lot more smart from a fantasy perspective in terms of how it helps us. Pittman is recouping some value here. JT, of course, looks like he has more value. They're calling situational plays that are extending drives, and they aren't going 3 and out nearly as much. This is a team that isn't sputtering to the point of just self-defeat every week, and that's important here. It sounds like just the worst compliments you could be giving to an offense at any point in time, but it's working at a higher level than it did with Sam Ehlinger and then it did with Frank Reich calling, RPO bubble screens and all this stupid crap on 3rd and short. Hand the ball off to Jonathan Taylor. There was one time that Jeff Saturday didn't this afternoon. I watched every snap of that game, but at the end of the day, I feel a lot more confident in this Matt Ryan-led offense with Jeff Saturday, whether he is, however much of his hand is involved in this offense. I do feel that the way the Colts have performed the last 2 weeks have created an environment a lot more conducive to fantasy success for JT than we've seen throughout the season so far. Last point here, I apologize. I've gotten a bit long-winded in a few of these takes, but it is extremely interesting stuff, at least from my perspective, that I had a lot of fun diving into this week. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode as well. If you did, of course, feel free to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, as always, if you're new around here. But our final takeaway is that I hope, and extremely just crossing my fingers, I hope this stays and holds true, but it looks like Keenan Allen is finally back. Now, he was on a snap count restriction this week, but he looked like himself. And they talked about this in the pregame. The broadcasters throughout the night talked through how Keenan Allen finally looked 100%. And despite the fact that he was the guy in the snap count restriction and Mike Williams was not, the guy who said he felt 200% and then, played like 10 plays and rolled his ankle up again, Keenan finished this game. And he made a couple of really big plays that actually put the Chargers ahead on a deep fade, a 46-yard route that he ran. Actually, I'm not entirely sure if it was a fade route or not, but it was a vertical pressing route that he ended up catching for a really nice gain of 46 yards. He finished with 5 for 96. Nearly had a touchdown as well. That was knocked away, though. So it looked really good from Keenan. He was involved in this contest and made big plays when it counted. We saw him doing the classic Keenan Allen stuff, sitting down in zone coverage, getting right after the catch, being a possession, dependable receiver. And with the money on the line, the game hanging in the balance for Justin Herbert. He went deep to Keenan and got picked off. I feel so bad for Herbert, man. The guy goes up by 4 points, and then Pat Mahomes storms down the field and takes the lead. Travis Kelce had 3 consecutive catches for touchdowns and has his, 14th straight road win in division. So felt so bad again for this Chargers team that just continually falls just short after putting up spectacular performances against this Chiefs team. But Pat Mahomes is like the Grim Reaper in the last 2 minutes of football games. So Keenan, though, again, positive takeaways here. If he can avoid the injury report next week, I think it's full steam ahead here. And, we're on our way to hopefully some really nice games, especially in PPR formats. But he did lose a fumble. That sucked. Kind of a bang-bang play, though, at the end of the day. So not getting too hung up on that. I was very impressed by what I saw. And, of course, I'm looking forward to the future with optimism for Keenan and his fantasy stock for this season. So, as always, you guys, I appreciate the heck out of you. Those are our 10 takeaways from Week 11 Fantasy Football. Love you guys. Thanks for watching today's episode. We've got our waiver wire content out for today as well. Check that out, and I'll see you there. Peace out.